Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for the folks that are watching at home. I am truly honored to be here, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of all of your busy schedules to be here this week. As you know, this is Veterans Day weekend, and Veterans Day is on Monday. And I know a lot of Americans will say Veterans Day is this weekend, and they'll think about Memorial Day come May, but we need to be thinking about these things every single day. It's our duty, especially when you look at the fact that although we have 330 million Americans, only 2.5 have gone on to Iraq or Afghanistan. It's less than 1% of America who has had such an incredible burden during this time. We all know that 9/11 changed all of our lives, but I think about those military troops, and also those military families that need us during this time. I wanted to say it is awesome to be here. When Chris Marvin asked me to be here from Got Your Six, I was honored. Their organization plays such a critical role in bridging that civil-military divide. When you think about how America and the world looks at the American trooper, the fact that there are some sad cases, the suicide rate's too high, homelessness is too high, and we'll talk about that in this panel. But there are a lot of great Americans who are doing terrific things that we should be so proud of. You heard them today. Now, we happen to be blessed. We're the second panel of the day, and that means we're the best panel because we're second to none, okay? I was the 82nd Airborne Paratrooper. We're a little cocky, all right? We are second to none. I will tell you that in my part of it, if you look at my Wikipedia page or whatever, I am a proud Democrat. This isn't a political speech. I'm a proud Democrat. What you don't know is my wife is a Republican. So I have a mixed marriage, all right? And I took that spirit into Congress. I always felt that way. Most folks don't know. My best friend in the Army became a U.S. congressman. And he's a conservative Republican from Florida. His name's Congressman Tom Rooney. I'm hosting a show for MSNBC this Sunday from noon to 1. He's my first guest. And we're doing it live from Ground Zero. Because I want to make sure people know that veterans especially know what it means to put our country first. That is missing too often in Washington. I know Karen's part of the panel. You heard her speak a little bit earlier. She works for Senator Tim Kaine. I have a bone to pick with Karen a little bit. As you know, she was an Air Force pilot. She flew C-17s. At the same time, I was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. That means I jumped out of her airplanes. I had a couple rough landings, so she owes me a drink later on. But we have a terrific panel, and I don't want to take a lot of the time, but I do want to say one thing. When you look at the U.S. Congress right now, there's only 21% of the members of Congress have military experience. 21%. But 40 years ago, that was 78%. So whether you're thinking about running yourself or being part of a team or being part of politics, be engaged. It's like Tommy Sowers said, be a citizen, not an idiot. He said it much more diplomatic than I did, okay? But be a citizen because we have a duty to make our country better and, frankly, to make our world better. So when I call back up the panel, this panel is nationally and internationally renowned, so come on up. I don't know if it's the voice of God or just me. It's probably just me. Although I was in 1987 Altar Boy of the Year at St. Anselm's. So, yeah, kind of. So, thanks so much. And they're mic'd up. So, if you have a question they're dying to ask, please get up there. Otherwise, I'm going to start taking my prerogative by asking. For those back at home, please Twitter. Or we'll try tweet, Facebook. Get the word out because it's pretty awesome, and make sure that use the hashtag #VetInspired. So I tell you what, Jake, let me just start with you. You were the last one that just spoke, if that's all right. And it hurts me to go to the Navy guy first because I want to go to Tommy, who's an Army guy, but I'll go to the Navy guy, Naval Academy guy who became a Marine. But Jake, what was the process when you left? I just want to, when you left Iraq, part of the invasion force, and we were there. I was there in 03 and 04 and Baghdad. But when you were there and you went home, how quickly did you go? Did you go right into poverty fight? Did you say this is what I'm going to do, or was it really at Stanford you said, all right, I'm honing on this?
So I ended up actually doing another tour after that. I had to do one more tour. because I feel like sometimes I have to hit over the head with a 2 before I actually realize what I need to be doing. But after I did that second tour, I decided to transition out, and as I did so, I got out and I quickly realized I had an engineering degree. I didn't really know anything about the science of poverty, or I wasn't a development economist, wasn't a Peace Corps guy. So I really spent about 1.5 years researching the problem, try to figure out what's already working and what's not and kind of why. What are the gaps in the market? And then I began to build some ideas, and I tried to get a job actually with some other good organizations that I respected, but nobody wanted to hire me. So I didn't have the background that people were looking for, I guess. But I'm pretty entrepreneurial, so that took me on this quest to kind of go to the business school. But I went to business school with one purpose, one point in mind, which was to build Nuru, my organization.
That's awesome. It's funny, when I was in Iraq, I used to say, you can grab a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division and say, son, you're going to go fly the space shuttle next week, figure out how to do it. And that paratrooper, he'll find a way how to do it. I'm proud. When you talked about the numbers, I'm a big believer in metrics, and you get what you measure. Mm-hmm. So that's a good segue to Guy, because since you run Red Owl Analytics. But were you surprised when you saw those numbers with Jake? I mean, I'll have to be honest with you. As a former policymaker for a country, I've never seen a presentation like that, Jake, about the extreme poverty. Did that surprise you, Guy? And did you have any comments?
Sure. I mean, I think that something that I would say I have learned, and I learned this. I think the first time I ever saw a country of extreme poverty was really when I was in Afghanistan. And I remember driving through the area and looking at the nomads and looking at these people in tents and seeing the animals and watching the conditions of the people outside the bases. And, it's a shock to the system. I'll say this, I have realized that I've never been to Africa. I haven't been to any of those places yet. But I was even a month ago in southern Italy, where my family comes from, and where there's 50% unemployment, and this is a European country. So I mean, I can only project that into what the rest of the world looks like. So I think it's an incredibly valiant mission. I was proud to just listen to you talk, and I'm excited personally to try to figure out a way to help you in your journey. So,
and I think that's one of the purposes of all of us being here. I mean, to make sure that we come together. I know for me, I've represented part of Philadelphia in Bucks County, so in Pennsylvania in Congress, so 700,000 people. But you look at, it wasn't really my section of Philadelphia, but you look at other parts of Philadelphia where it's over 60% of Philadelphia right now is below the poverty level. So they only have about a 26% pass rate of African-American males graduating from high school, 26%. So when you talk about choices, having choices, making sure that people know, I devote a lot of my time to big brothers, big sisters, mentor young kids and everything. Karen, let me go to you. You obviously work for Senator Kaine, who a lot of folks in politics say he's on the short list of being either a presidential candidate potentially, and I'm not asking you where he's going, or at least a vice presidential candidate. A sharp guy. So you basically you're his MLA, which is Military Legislative Assistant. Have you, because I haven't seen, listen, I was in the Intel Committee in Armed Services. That is very powerful. And you look at this causes of extremism. Mm. Did you take anything away? And I don't want to belabor the point. I mean, if you want to talk about something else too, but what did you think? And did that give you a different perspective?
From Jake's?
Yeah, from Jake's
presentation. Yeah, no, it was a fantastic presentation. And Senator Kaine is on both the Armed Services Committee as well as Foreign Relations. So I think he's at a unique intersection of both the military and the diplomatic, as well as the development missions that we have. So we do have additional staff in our office that work on those issues. And I think we've had the benefit of seeing how important it is, just as you mentioned, Jake, to recognize the root cause of the problem and realize that it's not always the military tool in our toolkit that is the best solution to that problem. And I think that we can be a mouthpiece for that as an answer. I think one of the dangerous things is constantly using our military to solve those problems, and that's why you have to have a broad view of the range of options there. And development is one of those, and tackling poverty. So yeah, absolutely, his presentation resonated with me, and can't speak for my boss, but I can say that he is very much engaged in those issues on his role on the Foreign Relations Committee.
Yeah, and Karen, how about your role? Let me just switch gears a little bit with you. Your role in Congress as a staffer in a U.S. Senate office. Mm-hmm. How do you reach out? Is there veterans that work together, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, in the staff level and in the elected? Because I was in the other chamber, but in the Senate as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The really interesting thing that I found working on the Hill is that there seems to be a growing network of recent veterans, either working there or running for office. Tammy Duckworth and Tulsi Gabbard are personal heroes of mine on the House side, and lots of great veterans. I had the pleasure of working on the Appropriations Committee last year for Senator Dan Inouye, and unfortunately, he passed away last year, but as a World War II veteran, I think he really set the standard for a lot of the work that's done. So today, there's an organization called Hill Vets, and they're just trying to network among veterans on Capitol Hill, and with no agenda. It's not about policy or politics, it's just, hey, let's get together. And one of the things that I alluded to in my talk is that we work in a bipartisan manner all the time, but people don't see it. It's when the cameras are off, it's behind closed doors. And a lot of that work really happens with veterans. The folks working for senators who are on the Armed Services Committee or doing defense work, I would say that's probably one of the most bipartisan groups that you'll find. And a lot of those people are veterans. So that's been really encouraging to find that network.
Yeah. Tommy, I'm sorry, Dr. Sowers. Let me go. I'm used to
Tommy
calling it. And Tom and I joked we were both growing a beard for today, and Tommy was successful, and this is what my beard looks like. But Tommy,
I wouldn't call this successful.
it's a little patchy, but it's all right. We still love you. Tommy, explain to us, the role. You're in charge of intergovernmental relations for Secretary Shinseki, Vietnam veteran, West Point graduate. What do you see? Do you see Democrats and Republicans coming together when it comes to the VA?
Well, we really have seen that, and it starts with my boss. I mean, Secretary Shinseki has dedicated his life to being a citizen, and I mean, he's 71 years old, and I cannot keep up with that guy. He is absolutely committed. He knows that veterans have committed so much, and he embodies that commitment of giving back to them. And really, of the 332,000, a third of the employees are veterans. And if you think the vast majority of our employees work in the medical field, the fact that almost all my staff are veterans. So, in terms of bringing the parties together, it is one of those issues that we've seen both Democrats and Republicans come together time and time again. Literally, in the past hour, we released that the millionth beneficiary of the post 9/11 GI Bill, something that I know that you supported and nurtured along, just received that benefit. 1 million. That's out of 1.6 million eligible folks. I mean, it changed my life. It's Dr. Sowers because of the post 9/11 GI Bill, and I know it changed a lot of folks' lives in here. We've also seen the budget expand under both Republican, Democratic presidents, Republican-led Democratic houses as well. The concern is what's going to happen next year and the year after that. At the VA, we are currently caring for the child of a Civil War veteran. True story. So how long of a tail do you think these conflicts that most of us have been involved in, how long of a tail will we have? It's a long one. And what typically happens if past this prologue is that benefits flow to veterans during conflict and then they flow away. And so that's where getting folks into Congress, getting you back in there, whatever it takes.
My wife will kill you. She's watching. You're in trouble.
But that's a critical thing is to make sure that when the guns fall silent, that the benefits for veterans continue.
I want to highlight the fact that if people want to ask questions, please don't hesitate to go up there. We promise we'll be nice to you. Tim, how about you? I know you're at NYU now, and I appreciate your remarks about as far as moral decision making. You were also with the Iraq Afghanistan Veterans of America
for a brief
before. How did you see your role, and where do you see your role moving forward once you graduate from NYU? And are you using the GI Bill, I'm assuming?
I'm using the post 9/11 GI Bill.
You owe me a drink then, too, when we get out of here.
Fair enough.
Just joking.
I mean, I think, I served before I was in the military. I was a teacher in the South Bronx. And so I kind of relate to a lot of things that you think about in terms of poverty and things like that. And I think that's a lifetime struggle. And the thing about morality, I think, that I was kind of touching on is that if you've made it in America, more or less, you don't have to worry about a lot of the decisions that people who are in other countries or who live in poverty here have to make. You can make decisions, and there's a logic to it, and you can kind of do the right thing, go to college, get a job after school, maybe go to graduate school, and there's a stepping stone, and it works for you. But if you are poor in America, it doesn't. You can do all the same things that someone else does and still not make it. And I saw that with the students that I was teaching, that they were working hard day in and day out, getting the same degrees as everyone else, but it didn't mean as much, and people didn't respect it as much. And I think internationally it's the same thing, even more so, that the decisions we make sometimes have no logic to them. There's complete chaos in certain parts of the world that we live in, and not places that are as far away as you'd think of as like Afghanistan or Iraq, but places right across the border from the United States. So when we look at what we're going to do afterwards and we look at the service that we've done so far, I think that there's a compulsion to continue that, and I think that's why most people end up joining in the first place, and I think that that never ends for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I was proud. I didn't graduate from West Point, but I was a professor there, and I'm a huge, same as Tommy, I'm a huge proponent of their mission statement, which is creating leaders of character for a lifetime of service. And that lifetime of service, especially with veterans, we want to continue to serve. Not necessarily wearing the cloth of our country anymore, but in other ways. So, Guy, let me go to you. You're a very successful business owner. You've hired hundreds of veterans yourself. What has given you most joy in your continuing service in this chapter in your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. About a year and a half ago, I actually, a very, very dear friend of mine called Anne Marie Craig, who was at one point my assistant, left me and then went to go work with General McChrystal, and came back 6 months later and said, all right, I want to do something new. And we sat around and talked about how to do something in the veteran space, and we launched something called the Commit Foundation, which I'd highly recommend anybody check out. But we started bringing together small groups of veterans to create intimacy in very intimate environments. And so the first thing we ever did, we took 12 vets and 12 business leaders, and we just locked them in a room for 24 hours, basically, and took cell phones away and sat around and told stories, and got really powerful about trying to affect the way that veterans thought about the next phase in their life. And I will tell you that fundamentally has been the most powerful thing that's happened to me in this space. It's led me to people like Brad Snyder, who's a Naval Academy graduate who lost his eyesight in an EOD explosion and an IED explosion in Afghanistan. It's led us to do, just have these tear-jerky kind of sessions. And I guess I would say that I have made a decision to support causes like that, because I feel like, and I'll just say this, my focus, I would recommend everybody do something in the space where you can be effective, rather than, and really think about that, where you can add value. And maybe that's me as a business mindset thinking about it a little bit. But I have found that where I can be effective is with sort of, I think there's a tremendous amount of stuff going on in helping vets who are disabled, or there's a tremendous amount of work going on in helping vets who may not know, who have poor educational backgrounds or health issues or PTSD or all these kinds of things. I've kind of vectored my efforts in the veteran space around helping people who want to be overachievers, because I feel like I can somehow help, alter their path up. But, I will tell you, if you're not already doing something like that, and you're not getting intimate with people, and you're not getting that soul food, it tastes pretty good, and I've been very, very happy to be a part of it. So,
yeah, that's great. Karen, let me go back to you. You talked about the hill vets,
mm-hmm.
right? How about the role of women right now and how they're perceived as veterans? Do you think that's changing? That society understands that they're standing shoulder to shoulder with the men in these wars, unlike in other past conflicts?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a great question. It surprised me that it's still a question, I guess, because to me, I never thought about it as serving as I'm a woman. I just walked in there. The airplane doesn't know what gender you are. So as long as we're sticking those landings, like you mentioned. But I think it's a tough question, because, again, I wonder why we're still asking the question when, by and large, I feel like women have been serving in combat environments. I think but the question is always ripe for discussion. As far as the best way forward, I think having that discussion and having that vigorous back and forth is what seems to be going on right now, and figuring out the right way to implement that. But I also think that I had such a strong network of other, we call it chick pilots. We have a chick pilot reunion. These are women I served with in Charleston, other C-17 pilots. And when I moved to Washington, D.C., I found a fantastic network of women veterans, and that was really helpful. One thing I do see, though, is a need for additional voices from the female veteran community. I think that how we talk about it and our characterization of war and the experience does seem to be dominated by male veterans. There are just more men who have served, so that's understandable. However, I would encourage other female veterans to get out there and tell their stories and to get involved in other ways. One woman that I know, Kayla Williams, who's an Iraq veteran who's fantastic, she has even said that one of her concerns is that there seems to be this veteran-on-veteran competition of my deployment was worse than yours. And so women, because a lot of them aren't serving in the infantry, are scared to tell about their experience, even though their experience is just as valid. So I would encourage other female veterans to be as brave as you were when you signed up and tell your story today.
Yeah, there's no doubt. In these wars, there's no front lines necessarily.
Exactly.
We have a question from the audience. Dave Foster.
Great. Hi, I'm Dave Foster. I run a nonprofit economic development company in Camden, New Jersey, and I'm also working on a startup to promote veteran businesses. You know, one of the challenges that we hear from the folks who are still serving on active duty is the integration of new troops into the force who have not served overseas, have not done the combat tour. And this is certainly going to be the challenge I think we as a veterans community are going to have now, is how do we continue this movement and bring in folks who maybe don't share that same combat deployment type experience. So I'd love to hear from the panel about thoughts on how we make this movement big and enduring for the next generation who's coming up behind us.
I'll hit that. I mean, we've been facing new people coming in without combat experience for the past 10 years. I mean, when I joined my unit, I obviously had no combat experience beforehand. And one of the things, and I'll kind of tell a negative story first, is that my first week in my platoon, my CO called me back in on a weekend because there was a report of a hazing incident. And a bunch of the Marines had just totally beaten up a bunch of kids, a bunch of the new kids, really, really badly. Like, kids had to go to the hospital. And so how do you respond to something like that? And that's not just that unit either. That's, I'm not going to say it's widespread, but like there's a tendency to want to haze young guys. And so we put them all in prison and we kicked them out of the military because that's what you do. You don't tolerate that kind of thing whatsoever. If these people are going to go to combat with you eventually, then you train them and you take care of them and you bring them into the brotherhood, and that's just simply the only way to do it. And so as we transition into a new era where we're kind of hopefully moving beyond these wars at some point, I think that's exactly the approach that you need to take. And I think the worry later on in life will be, as we faced in the early part of the war, when the senior people who are ordering you into combat haven't been in combat. That's where it becomes a little bit trickier. Less so when you're ordering a junior guy in, but you have that credibility. And so when we get to that point 50 years from now or in the next war, that will be, I think, the biggest challenge.
We're going to go to a live stream question right now. How is the Center of Innovation and the VA collaborating to support veterans?
So it's a great question. Under Secretary Shinseki, we created this VA Center for Innovation, and it starts from this premise of we don't got it. Like, we need assistance from folks outside of the government to solve some of these big knotty problems, which is a great first principle to start with. And so some of the things that the center has done is they've done a number of competitions where they both internal, where we really crowdsource ideas. They come up from our employees, and then external as well. We've brought in folks like Craig Newmark, who kind of opens up a whole world of nerddom to us that is needed inside of the VA, and allows us to bring new innovative solutions to some of the problems that we're facing.
That's great. Sarah, I want to go to your question.
My name is Rod Davis. I'm from the Texas A&M University System, and I thought I'd just represent for higher education because I haven't heard much discussed about that and all this that we're doing, and it really plays a key role, as you know. I would just remind you that after the initial GI Bill, excuse me, in 1944, about 8 million veterans returning from the war used that bill for educational purposes. About 2 million higher ed, changed the whole landscape of universities in America. Another 6 million went to trade schools, vocational schools, got certificates, which are equally important and are very much used still today. So in the evolution of all this, Jake, you had a fantastic presentation. I completely agree. I've done some work too in terms of poverty and the influence on education of kids in this country. It's the leading factor, I think, in poor results there. The A&M system through the Borlaug Institute, for example, is very concerned about feeding people around the world. Dr. Borlaug, who's passed away, he was actually my Little League coach when I lived in Mexico City. That's the real fundamental stuff that you can get through education. It's feeding people is like huge, and we tend to forget that sometimes. We're obsessed with technology, but really people have to eat, and they have to go to school, and they have to live and get all that. Higher ed education is the key to a lot of that. And a lot of our vets, I think you referred to how many people don't know about their benefits. Mm-hmm. They don't know that they have these benefits. We run into this all the time. I get calls all the time. At the system level, we have 11 different campuses, or 11 different campuses and 13 campuses, 11 universities, I should know that. All the time, can I do this? How can I do that? And it's just very basic levels of no information. So we're joining you in trying to get that out there, to get people to go, get the education. What Jake has done, sorry to pick on you again, but you wouldn't have been able to do that, right, without going and getting your degree, learning how to do it and transfer that into the world. So we look at that, and I think higher education needs to do a much better job a lot of times of welcoming these vets into the community. That's a difficult transition. The state of Texas very recently, started a thing called College Credit for Heroes. And this is like, not just thank you for your service, but here's something we're doing for you. And it allows returning veterans to use their military education and training. You may all be familiar with the ACE protocols for transferring military service into credits. The Texas College Credit for Heroes program matches it to a specific course in the Texas higher education curriculum, which makes it much more difficult for some academics, unfortunately, to say, no, it doesn't quite work for us. It does. We proved it. So things like that we learn how to do, and we can transfer into really meaningful results. I just got through reading part of Andrew Bastovich's new book. I think it's called Breaking Trust. He really deals with this issue, and it's strong stuff. But I think it's worth reading. Finally, I'd just like to also say we have a symposium every year, and this year we had Dr. James Wright as our keynote speaker. He was a president emeritus of Dartmouth. He's written a book, higher ed, called Those Who Have Borne the Battle. And I recommend it for everybody in here to read, really, because it traces the history of the treatment of veterans in our society from the Revolutionary War up to now. The distressing thing is it's always the same. We love you, we forgot you. We love you, we forgot you. We're going to go through that again here. So we're trying to find ways to address that problem, and as it grows, it's really wasn't a question. I guess I just came up to talk.
Listen, and the book that you just mentioned, Andrew's book, Dr. Gates, who is the president of Texas A&M, by the way, has a great insert there where he talks about how military service, how it's evolved, where it's what other people do. And it's very powerful, which is the premise behind the book. It's a great book.
I recommend it.
I read it at Barnes & Noble in Bucks County. So, Jake, let me go to you. He talked about higher ed. When you were at Stanford, when you were there with your classmates getting your MBA, what was that like? Did they understand what you had been through and what you were going to try and do?
That's a really interesting question, because I think when I first went to Stanford, we talk a lot about how we want civil society, civilians to be able to respect and what we have done and understand us and all this. But I think, at least I'll speak for myself, I was pretty judgmental coming into Stanford, thinking I was going to meet a liberal audience that was not going to understand me at all, put me in a box. So I lied to my classmates when I first got there and about what I did, and I didn't even talk about my service, which I'm ashamed to say in the beginning, because I was one of like 3 military guys in my class, and I was nervous about it. And so, but over time, what I found was that my classmates really wanted to understand who I was. And so I started to talk. I remember one night over a couple beers, I actually, one of the other guys in my class was the aide to the vice president at the same night the war started. He was talking about how everything went down in the Situation Room and kind of, President Bush coming out, looking out the window and being, the war had just started. And then that kind of encouraged me to start telling the story from the other end. Like, here's what happened on the berm, in Kuwait when that decision was made. And that allowed me to start talking about it a little bit. And what I found was a really welcoming audience of people who really wanted to care about me and respect me for what I had done. And they wanted to help. And I had so many classmates who wanted to get in the fight with me and really help me build this organization in a really smart way, And I found faculty members who wanted to link me up with everybody they could in Silicon Valley to get this thing off the ground. So I like to talk a lot about my mistakes, and one of the biggest mistakes I made was judging those who were not in the military about how they would receive me as I tried to integrate back into society.
How about you, Guy? When you came back, I mean, do you find most folks when they find out you were an Iraq veteran that you were, obviously you were at Oxford after West Point, but were they surprised when you were there, number one, and then 2, now in the business world?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I'll take an interesting angle on this, hopefully, which is I have ceased trying to brand myself as a vet, and I don't think I need to. I sort of have tried to move it into my core of something that has really shaped me, and that I'm going to use that as an advantage in my life. But I'm going to take, the tact of when I'm in a group of people. If I'm pitching a group of venture capitalists on a new company, and I'm trying to raise money, I need to understand. I mean, I'm going to color that with a little bit of my experience to show them how I'm special. But I still need to be great at what they expect me to be great at. I need to be a great CEO first, right? And if and so I guess, I don't know how I can say this succinctly, but I could imagine being in an environment where I come fresh out of the military, and I'm thinking about, do people appreciate me for who I am, for what I've done, for what I'm. At the same time, I would put it back on the veteran community that we have to come in there and go, all right, look, we first have to succeed at what they expect out of the general population. We first have to be, at a tactical level, a great citizen, a great partner. Be just like everybody else, be great at being that, and then let your veteran thing be something on top that they can never take away from you, and they can never, I don't know if that makes any sense.
It's funny because you're an analytical guy, which I'm hoping you could advise the Philadelphia Phillies because we need help in Philadelphia. But I look at, in the military, for me, it was like, okay, I got to get a 300 at my PT test to max it. I got to do X, Y, and Z to show up, do the regular stuff. And then this is the lane of initiative. What else I could show I'm not great on the show that I'm doing extra stuff. I know even in Congress, it was like, okay, what bill am I going to pass? What bill am I going to be part of? What are we going to get done? And being in a law firm, we're now being part of MSNBC. I know for me, it's like, well, what do you expect from me? Like, how do I do well? And I'm sure that's what many people struggle with because it's not as clear necessarily. Those metrics aren't there. Do you feel the same way, Ty? You see you shaking your head, or you have a comment?
Well, I'm just personally. I mean, I've certainly never been a senior government executive. Serving at this level, and I think I agree with Guy's point. It's not. I shouldn't get any slack cut because I'm a veteran, and I'm proud of that. But I had to come in and listen and learn and trust your folks. The good news is that those same core skills that make you, I think, a great businessman, a great congressman, surround yourself by good people, have a plan, work hard. I mean, I learned those in the military, so I return to those core principles pretty much in everything I do.
Like to plan your work and work your plan.
Yep.
We have a question from the audience. And anyone could jump in here too. This is not a. This is the second, but this is the number one panel, so we have a lot of expectations here.
My name's Brad Harrison. I'm class of '94, West Point, do early stage venture capital, invested in Troop Swap, ID Me, maybe Guy. It depends what he's disclosing. No, but basically, and I know Jake. I know the guys from Mission Continues, and one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is, I was an infantry officer. And my job was to go out and blow stuff up, right? And then I became a primary staff officer, and I was the G5. And my job was to go in there and talk to people and use all these other skills. And when you look at the success of Team Rubicon and Mission Continues in the transitioning vets, it's not violence, it's all these other skills. And the brand of the veteran does not reflect those skills. So there was this talk by a guy named Thomas Barnett that talks about the shift in the military, that nobody can meet the United States' military superiority. We're always going to win. But that 2/3 of what our mission really needs to be is non-combative. And that the skills and the values that we use, right? Wes Moore said, you think about this guy and you think he only follows orders, but you don't realize that in Afghanistan, he's in a dynamic situation that changes every single minute. And so the question is, should we, from developing leaders of character at West Point, through training our military, long before we ever think about them transitioning out, should we be redefining the brand, the values that the United States military represents globally, and start to shift on the same things that we're having success with our vets transitioning, right? Jake, Mission Continues, IAVA. The success that they have is integrating them back into communities, building teams, disasters. I've been part of both those organizations during Sandy. So my question for all of you as leaders that are all in interesting spots is, should we actually be expanding the conversation for the benefit of transitioning vets by actually looking at the full life cycle of the United States veteran, where they start, what they learn when they're on active duty, what skill sets and values are most important, and then all the way through. So that's what I would pose to the group as a question.
I'll take part of that. The vast majority of veterans did not deploy. And the vast majority of those that deploy do not fire shots in anger. My first deployment into Iraq, I was living in a house with 12 Green Berets. I was surrounded by a lot of folks. My experience was probably like most of the experiences. I spent my day figuring out how to negotiate with tribes and get an election going, and not the kinetic part of war. But in terms of rebranding what a veteran is, I think it's one of the things I was really inspired by all the stories here, is that Jake's rebranding what a veteran is and what people think of when they hear the word veteran. Guy is doing the exact same thing, and I love this idea of almost kind of the afterthought of, hey, Guy's a great businessman. Oh, did you also know that he's a veteran? That's how you rebrand it.
I want to throw something. I make this land nav analogy sometimes. If anybody knows what land navigation is, it's where you take a physical compass, not your iPhone compass, but a physical compass, and you get a map and you get thrown out in the middle of the forest and you plot 6 points and you figure out how to geolocate where you are manually, and then you say, I got to walk from this here to here and I have to go 73 degrees, 1,200 meters. And that's land nav. And the military side of that, I think the brand part here is can I get my compass? Can I shoot the point? Can I get the azimuth? Do I know the direction? Can I count my steps? That's military, right? That's real rigid military stuff. But it turns out that people who are good at land nav, and a lot of people in the military are pretty good at land nav, they're good at land nav not because of that, because you can walk 6 feet before you hit a tree or a cliff or a swamp or a bush, and you got to get off course and get back on it. And pretty soon you realize that, all those obstacles in the way, that's the real game. It's not the military skill set of shooting the azimuth. So I always say, if you're good at land nav and you're a vet, and you don't get frustrated with it. You actually kind of get excited about all that chaos. Can I ride this? Then, that's the skill set, And so I feel like in the business world, the other thing I tell people all the time whenever I talk to people transitioning, I'm like, look, life is not fair in the short term, and get that out of your head now. Inputs don't equal outputs. It's okay. You got to, in the long term, yes, I really think it is. But and sometimes it's not too. But this notion of like, I think the biggest challenge that internally we face with the Brett comes from ourselves. The biggest problems I ever had with my own peers and people and friends and colleagues is like, we as veterans want to know the path. We want to know what we need to do, so where do we go next? And the world doesn't work like that. So I think it's both how do we actively rebrand the veteran, but I think it's also about how we reset the way we think about it. So.
Anyone else? Karen, do you have anything?
Actually, I think it's a great question. What you're asking us is to have a more holistic viewpoint of what it means to serve and what it means to be a veteran. And as someone who didn't identify herself as a veteran when I transitioned from active duty to the reserve, and I'm still a reservist, it took me a while to really realize, because I thought, well, I'm not an old white guy, so I'm not a veteran. I wasn't there on the ground in infantry, so I didn't really but I did deploy. I flew in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan constantly. My life was unpredictable. And then I sort of realized that you have to identify yourself. Otherwise, not only is it a benefits thing, but it's also just a societal thing that other people learn from you. I think it's an interesting question because you're asking us to have a kinder, gentler perspective of what it means to be a military member, which a lot of people who are very strict, have a very strict interpretation of what the military should be will say, well, it's about killing, it's about violence and winning wars. But the reality is that we're serving in a number of different capacities, and we are sort of ambassadors when we're over there. And people, whether it's in Germany or Afghanistan, are seeing us in uniform, and we're representing. So we absolutely have to change that perception and that brand. I also think it will happen naturally, I hope, with a look at how this younger millennial generation, I would like to classify myself as young, in that generation, thinks about the work that they do. And it's very holistic. It's not just, I do this and this is what I do day in and day out for the next 20 years. It's, I'm entrepreneurial, I'm all about collaboration and community. It's just a different mindset in how we do our jobs. And so I think that branding will change as we have more people from that generation. And it could change the way people operate in the military and make us more effective.
Sir, you have a question?
Hi, my name is Robert So. I'm a former Marine. It also took part in the initial invasion of Iraq, so I was with you on Highway 7 with 3rd LAR. But right now I'm the CEO of a company that's about to launch an Android app that pays users every time they unlock their phones to view beautiful and creative ads. So I guess at this point I'm a CEO. Previously I was actually an enlisted Marine. One of the things that I really noticed throughout my career, even in business school, was that even if you looked at this panel, everybody's an officer, more or less, except for you, Jake, right? So I guess one of the questions is, how can we, and what is going on right now to empower the enlisted members of our military as well? Because I think we have some potential too.
Can I just, I talked earlier about how I want veterans to run for office. So Tim was speaking about Texas A&M. Sure. My gunner in Iraq got his college degree. He's now getting his master's at Texas A&M. Mm-hmm. He's about to go to law school, and I always say, you're going to be a congressman someday. Like, I'm trying to groom him to be the congressman. I won't tell you his name because I don't want to have an announcement yet because it's 6 years from now probably. But that type of mentorship is what I'm trying to provide because I really care about it. Mm-hmm. Just like when my buddy Tom Rooney, who's a Republican, wanted to run, he said, I'm thinking about doing it. Mm-hmm. I walked him through, and again, I'm a different party, but actions speak louder than words. I sat with him, I talked to him on the phone. I did things that I think were helpful because I believed in him.
Yeah, if I could speak about that one, yeah. I think that, so when I was at Force Recon, my platoon of guys, I learned everything I learned from my enlisted guys. They were far more intelligent than I was. I mean, they had all this experience, all this training, and amazing leadership skills. And I I am always blown away by the fact that the civilian world sees officers coming out of the military as perhaps more capable than the enlisted man. Like, I think I would love to see more guys like you and Jake, getting into the workplace and leading, and because I feel like your experiences under fire, many of my enlisted guys had to make split-second decisions, had to be able to navigate challenges that I did not have to navigate as an officer, which makes you far more prepared, far more capable of handling those difficult analytical decisions in the workplace. So I agree with you 100%. I think we definitely need to get more enlisted guys out there leading.
I want to say something here too, which is, I think you have, because of what he just said, you also have some advantages. And I will tell you that in the world you're choosing to run in, very quickly, it's irrelevant. I have never told anybody in the last year that I was a captain in the United States Army. Nobody gives a shit, to use a French term, So what I would tell you is, very quickly, you are redefining yourself as the CEO with a military background who led men and women and who saw combat, and that's all that counts. And so I would just get it, I wouldn't even worry about it. In fact, I'd just seize it. And I will tell you that moving forward, you're going to find that the advantage that you have mentally, your mental construct of being a doer, the person that actually does the work, which, not to say that officers don't, but but that's sometimes. That's the construct, that's the mental construct that's going to cause you to be successful, though. So I agree with you, though. Is there pedigree issues? Yeah, there's pedigree issues, though, in everything in life. Every field, what school you went to, what sport you played, what fraternity you were in, what this, what that. There's pedigree all over the place. But the great thing about life is, once you're 3 or 4 years away from it, you better be mentally beyond that anyway. So if that helps you think of it, that's how I would.
Thank you. Joe, you have a question?
Yeah, Joe Quinn from Team Red, White, and Blue. I actually want to piggyback what Guy said, and I'll start with the question and kind of take the journey to that question. We're all here together, anyone in this room probably believes it, but do civilians and citizens, the other 99%, do they really give a shit? It's easy to say it, but do they really? And I remember I came back from my second tour, and a lot of it, it could be in the political realm, business realm, entrepreneurial, the social sector. And I remember coming back from my second tour, and I had my uniform on, and this gentleman bought me a beer, and he's like, "Thank you for your service. What you do was great." And then it was election season, so he inquired on who I was going to vote for, and I told him, and then he said, "You could get your own damn beer." So it's okay. There's this nice glow of, "Oh, thank you for your service," with this monolithic creature, but once you really get into it, do people really care? And even in applying for jobs, on the other half of it, we're always told, I had the mistake of listing my accomplishments on a resume as we, my platoon and I, we did this. I was told you got to speak in I, and you really got to tell them what a platoon leader is. I feel like that's nonsense. I mean, if you're an employer and if you don't know some of these things, or if I put we instead of I mean, come on. I mean, there's got to be some education on the other side. So I guess in the business realm or the entrepreneurial realm, or even in politics, if we want, veterans to run for office, but, do we really? When we're the minority, a politician or people in politics will say, "Yeah, we're great, we love your veterans," but when you run against them, do they really want you to do it? So I guess from all perspectives, do you think people really care when it comes to the other side after the glow is kind of off of you?
No. People don't care. And I think that you can see that in the fact that there's not standing room only right now. And that if you look at the number of hits that these videos will get, we'll see how many people actually care, or how many people are going to continue to care, particularly after the Afghanistan war is over. But that's not necessarily, certainly not our fault, I don't think. But I think that the media, to a large degree, has started to focus on other things. And as they've done that, and we've lost that kind of mediated conversation between the civilians who decide that we go to war and the war itself. A lot of us have started to take that dialogue straight to people through things like this. And I think things like this are important if people are going to be focused on Kim Kardashian and all these other things, that they have to realize that as citizens, you do vote, you do have a significant impact, and over the past decade, we've seen that in a very, very profound way, that a different president can make a very, very different decision, presumably. So in the end, I think people have other concerns, and they're never going to care. And my father was a Korean War veteran, and that nobody really cared about that. People still don't even know that that was necessarily a war at times. I mean, they don't get that. So it's always been like this, and it will probably always be like this.
I wildly disagree.
We cannot. You know, I've felt this too. You know, you come back from a deployment and you still have dust on you, and you come back into a society that, you know, we've asked so much sacrifice from a small percentage. But boy, I've seen a lot of people care. I really have. And actually, let me take off my assistant secretary, and I'm just Tommy Sowers, a veteran here. I love the Team RWB model. And one of the reasons is because it's not just a veterans organization. I mean, I've gone on trail runs with civilians. I froze my tail off in Michigan going on another run with Team RWB guys. I was out in the far Rockaways and saw Team Rubicon. And it's not just like, hey, are you a veteran? Okay, we'll take you in civilian. No, it's an inclusive approach to this. So, you know, one of my broad concerns, and back to the historical point, is if it passes prologue, that care and that attention definitely fades afterwards. And so this is one of our challenges now, is how do we take that sea of goodwill that is out there, and before it evaporates, get the best practices that are out there so we actually know what a company should do if they want to be veteran friendly. A university, if they want to be veteran friendly. We should know that by now. We've thrown a ton of resources out. There's so much goodwill out there, and that's one of our challenges over the next year, really, which is how do we take these lessons learned and extend them through this period after war.
I would really like to say something here too. I think they do care. I do disagree respectfully. I don't think we want. I think there's a limit of how much we want them to care, in a sense, right? I mean, we want to live in a country where life is great, and we're not always feeling guilty about, as people, about are we spending enough time thinking about our military? You know, I actually think the balance is pretty good. And I kind of, not that I like that guy. I think he's a jerk for doing what he did. But I like the fact that people, you know, feel strongly about lots of different things, and just the veteran is a piece of it. And I would just tell you, as you get into your job searches and things like that, you know, again, that's not primary. And you say, well, shouldn't they be able to read my resume and know that that's the way I think as a military person? I think there's a balance there. I think it's on you when you decide I want to go into this sector. You got to know the way that, assuming that sector is not the military, you got to know the way that sector thinks. So I think there's a balance there. I think society does care. I have been incredibly blown away, more often than not, about, you know, people breaking down into tears because their grandfather or father served and they didn't, or maybe they had no connection to it and they just appreciated it. And I don't know. I feel like we live in an incredible country where people do care. So,
ma'am, do you have a question?
Hi, my name is Joanne Tucker, and I am an actor and civilian, and I co-run an organization and am married to a Marine, an actor, called Arts in the Armed Forces. And I also think people definitely care. We reach out to actors to volunteer their time to perform for the military, and everybody wants to be involved, and it's just they don't know how. You know, especially if you're from New York. I went to a private prep school on the Upper East Side, and there was no exposure to the military community. Nobody from my class was signing up. You know, my grandfather served, and I happen to have it in my family, so it became really personal when I met somebody who was a Marine for me. But I guess my question is, are there any efforts to integrate sort of the qualities that we're talking about that you get out of the military into education earlier? You know, to have a military presence within the curriculum, because it's what we're talking about is exposure. It's like once you're exposed to something, you start to empathize with it and understand and care about it. So where are the efforts to expose civilians, people who are not enlisting, not volunteering, to the community at an earlier level? And the same goes for just service in general. I remember my only exposure to community service was in high school as a punishment for, you know, not failing a final or something, or not showing up at gym class, whatever it was, instead of having it be a requirement from the beginning, so that then it doesn't become a punishment or an obligation. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there are tons of efforts out there, but it seems like both those things need to be integrated from an earlier level within the education system on every level. Then people don't have to. It's not such a foreign thing. If you're exposed to it, you understand. It's like going to a foreign country. You start to understand other cultures when you're exposed. And the military is a culture.
Jake, how about you? Okay, Tommy, you have a.
Well, I'll just take one piece from the beginning of it. That people wanting to get involved and not really knowing how. I see that as part of our responsibility. We're not that good at asking. We're not that good at figuring out how can you serve your country without, putting on a uniform, uprooting your life, moving to Washington, D.C., moving into the civil service. And that's what really excites me about what we're trying to do at VA Center for Innovation, what I'm trying to do in the office, what the Secretary is trying to do, which is figure out ways, if you've got expertise in branding, we need that. Expertise in using art as therapy, we need that as well. And figuring out a way to partner with you and, frankly, make that ask so that you can answer.
Yeah, I think it's a great question and a real challenge, especially given that we have an all-volunteer force and less than 1% of our country serves. It's not the era of post-World War II or post-Vietnam where more and more people interacted with or knew military members. So it is a real challenge. And I worry about it because I think a lot of young people just want to be pop stars when they grow up. And I wonder if these are their heroes, but we up here, we've alluded to President Roosevelt and others who are our heroes, and so it's how do we make that cool when people think about it as so challenging and difficult? I think programs like this are one way in terms of changing the narrative in the media, but all politics is local, right? So it's who are you interacting with at your grocery store or in your school. Troops to Teachers has been a program for years and years, and so if people are interacting at a younger age, I think things like Team Rubicon or Team Red, White, and Blue, community service, where people are seeing that interaction at a very interpersonal level, I think that goes a long way. And we also see it in politics, too. I mean, people aren't going to care unless they're forced to care. I do think we're at a unique point where a lot of people care about the military and say thank you, but how affected are they really? By the wars. Probably not a whole lot unless they've known someone, but they certainly haven't been taxed in order to feel the pain. So I think a lot of us are up here because we're asking questions about that. What is the human cost of war? What is the financial cost of war? It's up to us and others as veterans to change that narrative and start answering those questions.
And I think there's 2 points that...
You have to make them quick, Tim, because we have to wrap it up.
That really contribute to this. One is you mentioned that you had someone that was in the military in your family. We've kind of channeled that from World War II down to a very narrow slice of society now that has done that. And so as future generations, kids are born and things like that, there's going to be far fewer people who have a family member who is a veteran. And then in addition, obviously, the polarization of our country. I come from Santa Monica, California. It's one of the most liberal places in America. And I live in Brooklyn, which is also one of the most liberal places in America. And I'm pretty much the only veteran that all my friends know. So if we take those two things, we push all the veterans into certain areas, and then our family members haven't served, where does that leave us? And that's a big problem.
Give a round of applause to this #1 panel of the day.